this is your Saturdays, your weekends, so giving us your precious weekend to us. We've got a very interactive session planned, so this session is going to be very interactive. If at any point you want to ask a question, just put your hand up and Nikki will sort of take the question as it is. If you are too shy to ask a question, because I understand this is a bit of a touchy subject, there's a slido.com and our code is A530. So you can also ask a question on there and then I'll sort of ask it on your behalf if you don't want to sort of, verbally say out loud. I understand this is a bit of a touchy subject for some people, so whichever one works for you. But it's a very interactive session. This isn't like a lecture or a seminar. This is very much of an interactive workshop. So please, feel free to ask questions. The second thing is we know this is a taboo topic in the sort of our community, right? Like if I tell my mom about mental health conditions, she's like, so I know this is like a new topic and maybe we're not used to talking out loud about these kind of things, but please do sort of push yourself out of your comfort zone as much as you feel to. I think this is a safe space. I don't think anything you say here will be taken like, oh, she's got this problem or he's got that problem. It's a very open and safe space, so please feel free to ask questions. Like, there's no judgment here whatsoever. Like, unless you killed someone, that's the only. That's the only. If that's what you've done, just keep it quiet. I don't want to know. But yeah, so please like push yourself out of the comfort zone. Ask questions that you wouldn't normally ask. And then I'll let Nikki do for the rest.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you so much. He's done my bit of, the initial talk anyway, so I'll probably not reiterate it too much. But yeah, I guess I want to start by asking, how are we feeling right now? How are we doing?
Good.
Yeah? Good. I can feel the energy in the air, in the room. Obviously, hopefully by another next 5-10 minutes, we'll have more people coming in and, we'll have a room full of Nepalese youth. I haven't been in a room full of Nepalese youth for a long time, so yeah, I'm pretty excited about today. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of who I am, obviously some of you will know me, but some of you don't. So I am Nikki. I'm a medical doctor by background, so I've been working within NHS services for the last 10 years as a mental health professional, and currently working as a consultant psychiatrist in West Middlesex Hospital in Isleworth. And apart from my mundane day-to-day job, I'm also a mom to two beautiful children, Onik and Ojaswi. So yeah, they're just chilling at home with their grandmom. So yeah, left them with her. So really mental health. Okay, so we can talk about mental health today, and I guess I'm pretty excited to share my ideas, my experience and perspective of mental health to you. But what I'm more looking forward to is really share from like what Manish was saying earlier about, really getting your ideas about it. And really it's also part of a shared learning, even for me, coming here and, having this platform to talk about it. When we talk about mental health, it comes with this common stereotype of, the perception and misconceptions of it. And hopefully by the end of today, we can all walk out with a positive stance on it and we can share our learning with our family and friends when we go home. So that's really the objective. I guess apart from that, I wanted to just ask the audience, like what did you walk in with, thinking what would you achieve from today? Is there anything that you were thinking or expecting from today's talk? Shout out loud.
Just learn and observe.
Yeah. So perhaps also walk in just with an open mind, like just see what it is like, and just talking about it. Yeah, really. That's the objective. But let's kickstart with a little exercise, as we really want to make this an interactive session. So, how many people do you think have mental health?
Everyone.
Oh, brilliant! I was like,
Actually, but it would be interesting to hear if anyone thinks
otherwise. Exactly.
Does anyone think opposite?
Do you mean like mental health issues, you mean?
No, I'm just saying mental health.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because again, I put this as that is something that mental health. Just even hearing mental health, I've seen people sort of becoming very defensive and actually shying away. Oh, no, I don't have it. But as much as we have mental health, we have physical health, we have mental health, don't we? So yeah, brilliant. So that's half the job done for me today. So the next question is, how many people would experience mental health problem at any point in their life, do you think? What's the stats on that?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess when we're saying a mental problem, thinking about more sort of something that is much more problematic than, you know, the day-to-day stress and strains that we all experience.
So you mean like officially diagnosed?
Yeah, somewhat. And it could be any form of mental problem, but the officially diagnosed, that's right.
80%? Yeah.
Yes.
66%.
Very precise.
I'm glad that it's above 50% of you're saying. So yeah, it's actually 25. It's not sort of like, you know, one in four. So it's I know where you're coming from, but again, here we're talking about mental health disorders. So you know, it's but it's, I mean, you know, think about it, it's 1 in 4. Yes, it's common. What about at any given point of time? Let's even think about this room, and if we were a room full of 30 people, like how many of us would have mental health?
Same. A third, like a third, 25%.
16%, yeah, so somewhat around those lines. So it's a 1 in 6. But talking about our, you know, age bracket, and you know, sort of, I don't know what your ages are, but I'm just thinking sort of like, you know, age 16 to 24. Again, this is from the public health websites. Obviously, they have a specific range, and the reason being that obviously this is a age that obviously almost sort of sets the stone for people to develop mental health problems, you know, in their lifetime. So it's quite important to really understand. And then here we're talking about also depression and anxiety. Like how common do you think that this might be the case within that age bracket, 16 to 24?
I think it's a lot more common than what it used to be previously. Yeah. So,
Do you know why that might be the case? Why do you think it's much more?
I think there's a lot of external factors that contribute towards it. You know, like social media pressures.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think for any sort of young adult nowadays, it's a lot more difficult than what it used to be 10 years ago.
Exactly.
So I'm not really sure as to what the numbers might be. Maybe about 25%.
60%. So again, roundabout similar figures, and also because more people are talking about it and more people are seeking help as well, and more people are being diagnosed as well. So you know that obviously adds to these stats as well. So do we all know about mental health now? We've done a bit of exercise, but really, my objective for today is to I have divided into 2 halves. So first half we'll be talking, first about half an hour to 45 minutes, we'll be talking about mental health, mental illness in Nepalese diaspora, because I think that's quite important to understand the context of the social environment youth live in at the moment. So we'll be talking about that in more detail. And also the science behind illness, mental illness. And then we'll be spending a bit more time on depression and anxiety, because this is much more talked about mental health disorders within the diaspora. Right? And the second half will be deep diving into stress and, you know, its manifestations and its management. Okay, happy with that? Yeah. And again, please ask me questions. I'll definitely be asking a lot of questions. I think by the end of today, you'll be so annoyed of asking questions. So please, I'll, if I don't have answers to your question, I'll get back to you. I'll promise you that. So let's keep this really interactive. So, what is mental health? What do you think? I'm not waiting for a sophisticated answer for this one. Please give me any sort of, what's your perspective? What do you think mental health is?
Brain health.
Okay. By that, what do you mean by brain health? Meaning that?
Like having a clear mind, just sane.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like it's our mind.
Yeah.
Our mind.
Yes, it's
The
the
thoughts.
The mind, the thoughts.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, definitely the thoughts.
The well-being.
Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. What other things?
How focused your mind is. On
Yeah.
that
So very much about mind. So what is there? You know, obviously we're saying things about mind, but is there anything else that is obviously very much linked with mental health?
Emotions.
Brilliant. Yeah. Because thoughts are just a part of it, isn't it? How it manifests and how it is expressed could be in the form of emotion, actions. Brilliant. You've just hit the nail on those. Those 3 are the rhythm. This is amazing. So those are the 3 aspects. But again, many people, you know, different people have defined it in different ways. And again, the general, you mentioned about well-being, and the general theme is that it is a state of well-being, not just emotional but psychological and social. And obviously things about sort of being able to recognize your potential, your abilities, being able to exploit it, and also being able to cope with your day-to-day normal stresses in life. So that clearly is. But what actually stands out for me in the definition, and this is within the definition of WHO, is this sort of being able to contribute to their communities. And I think this is something I really want you guys to hold this thought in your mind, because we'll be talking about this in our subsequent slides, just to understand our position within the social environment and the culture that we live in, because that has a big impact on our mental health. Okay, so yeah, I mean, just put this down as a dynamic state of internal equilibrium, because we're faced with different adverse events in our lives, stresses in our life, and how do we maintain our sanity despite that. So we've talked about mental health. What do you think mental illness is then? So of course, we've talked about thoughts, emotions, behavior. Yeah, so what is mental illness? When we say these three aspects of mental health, when does it become an illness?
I think any time there's a threat to your well-being, right?
Yeah.
But in a way that is not manageable, let's say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm thinking on the same lines as well. But yeah, so mental illness, as you can see, there are different forms of mental illness, and we won't be going into all of those. We'll definitely talk about depression and anxiety. So it can have different why are they called different disorders? Because they have their characteristic ways of manifesting, and they have certain symptom clusters that makes it that disorder. So obviously, that's why we are here to diagnose that, and obviously to recognize what exactly it is. But again, I'm glad that you thought about these three things: thinking, feelings, and behavior. So it is a health condition. Health condition, because we're seeing mental health as also very similar to physical conditions, like sort of having going to hospital with a broken bone, or diabetes or hypertension even. Like if you think about diabetes and hypertension, you can't see it from outside, can you? It's very similar to mental health, but then you don't have the same stigma attached with that, because suppose you could measure it, right? But you couldn't necessarily measure mental health, mental illness. And again, like you said, how problematic it becomes, right? So it's the severity of distress. So how much is the person distressed by it, and how it impairs the person's functioning. So be it at workplace, relationships, or even sort of activities of daily livings, like being able to look after yourself, certain other things like cooking and all those sorts of things. So that's certainly when a mental illness is that's how it's defined. But thinking about how mental illness is defined within our Nepalese diasporas, our sort of social communities, what do you think if you ask our parents or our grandparents to say, what is mental illness? What would they say? What do you think they would say?
Crazy.
So cute. What else? Can you think of any other thing that they would say? Crazy, certainly. Losing control. Oh, you're like the put like you, like any possessed by spirits, yeah. And then it comes with this sort of they get into the stereotype of being unfit and rejected by the families and friends and wider society. And I think this is the point I really want you guys to now think about culture and how that impacts us as individuals. Now I've got a little exercise. So the first question: how many of you identify yourself mainly with the British culture? I know that you've been in this country for a bit. How many? Raise your hands. Okay.
Like a little bit, yeah. Of course.
Brilliant. Yeah, please feel free to raise your hands or shout aloud. Just want to see.
Otherwise, you guys can follow the interactive presentation in the booklets.
Yes, I forgot to mention about worksheet.
So,
are we going to do the group exercise as a group, or shall we break into small groups and do it and come back? Or
I think let's just carry on. We can actually, I think if you start doing group, then maybe we might not be able to cover the other things that we're planning to do. So maybe you can just tick the box next to where you think you fit in.
we have pens here, by the way, guys, if you need them.
okay, very nice.
They're my pens, so please give them back.
So I guess I'll just put those questions there on the screen, and we've got it on the worksheet. So yeah, when I ask you to raise your hand, it might feel a bit like, maybe I'm like a bit of both. But yeah, so where do you identify, sister?
Check off myself.
Sorry. Manish, you don't want to do the worksheet.
Oh, yes.
I'll do
And
it
she
myself.
Yeah, please.
You don't want to do it?
I've done it. That's so good. Take it. Okay. Just
I don't
just
think you
leave
do any of
parts.
that box. Yeah, I can certainly see myself fitting into one of them. Have we given a thought around that? Yeah, so people who have sort of identified yourself mainly with British culture, so you've taken a position of assimilation. It is a recognized position within the framework that I'll be talking about in a minute. People who identify as in both cultures, British and Nepalese, so you've taken the position of an integration. Identify mainly with Nepalese culture, separation, and if you don't identify with either of the culture, it's marginalization. Now, I'm sure like people you must have read about these. Does that sound familiar, these words? Yeah. So these are very recognized positions within the framework which we call this acculturation, and they've done a lot of research in this, and this is basically a framework to understand how ethnic minority groups they negotiate with the host culture. So, for example, for us, like Nepalese people, how they adopt into the behavior, languages, ways of living with British culture. So why that is important, why I'm talking about it today is because what research has shown is that whichever position you take within those framework has a direct impact on the psychological stress that you experience, and essentially that would be the way how it can manifest in mental health. So it's quite important to understand this. But to understand this further, I know you're taking some notes. I'll wait.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So to understand this a little bit further, I want to, again, keep this very interactive. So let's think about the first one here, cultural issues in development of illness. This is a CIMH model, which is a recognized model. What do you think that culture may have an impact on somebody to develop mental illness? What sort of things might make somebody predisposed to developing mental illness?
Maybe their upbringing and the environment that they grow up in.
Yeah, definitely.
And maybe like a cultural viewpoint of what it takes to be a man versus a woman. Like that kind of if you don't fit that
Gender.
mold, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. But how is that going to impact somebody's developmental illness though? What would that make somebody?
So if you think you have to act in a certain way or behave in a certain way but you're not, that can create a sort of conflict between you and your parents or you and whoever.
Certainly. And I know where it's coming from. I know you have a question to ask me later on, yeah. No, definitely. And what else?
I have a question, sorry. So when you say development of illness, you mean mental health illness, right? So
Yes,
there's the
mental
different ones
illness.
you showed before on the slide,
Mm.
like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, things like that.
That's it. Yeah, here we're just talking about mental illness and no other.
Okay.
I think the construction of value systems, right?
Sorry, construction value systems. Yeah.
So what is valued essentially within that sort of cultural system.
That's it. Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Family expectations, maybe.
Yeah, I think that has a massive role on this, doesn't it? Yeah, definitely. No, I think you've sort of hit a lot of points on that. I'll put a few more there. Think about let's say our parents or grandparents who have come to this country. They would not necessarily have the same education level or the linguistic ability to adopt or adapt into the social environment. They might not have the same sort of support network. Think about the refugees, the Syrian refugees, going into European countries. Like how would they integrate into that? What cultural framework they came in with, that would have an impact on that as well, isn't it? But I suppose again going back to that assimilation, that pressure of, assimilation. There's actually quite a lot of growing body of research to say that African and Afro-Caribbeans are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop schizophrenia in a Western society. So that's actually a known statistic. And also, as you mentioned, you're away from the family and how you would, how that would impact you. An experience of discrimination, of course. Yeah.
Oh no, I I just wanted to touch upon the assimilation, maybe like just to give an experience.
Yeah, please do.
For example, like being in the Nepali society here in the UK and growing up here, I feel like when you're in school, you feel kind of pressured to adapt to the culture around you.
Yeah.
And it depends on your age and where you are, right? How confident you are as well. So just when you're in school here, you want to adapt to your environment, you want to be part of this British culture and, you know, try and blend in.
Yeah.
But then I think what's happened with a lot of people, including me, is as you've grown older and you become more, at ease with yourself, you, I think, showcase more of your identity,
That's it.
especially Nepali identity. So it's just interesting.
And how you start feeling comfortable doing
Yeah,
that as well,
exactly.
isn't it? Yeah.
And you start feeling, I mean, you're always proud, but you start feeling more proud. And I think it just comes with age as well, I guess. And you know how confident
But
you
I guess
are.
not everybody would have a smooth journey during that sort of period of adopting, and a lot of people find it very difficult, and that's where the mental illness factors in, isn't it? But again, with racial discrimination, what sort of feelings would that evoke on people, do you think? Like if you, I don't know, I don't want to be asking that question, but a lot of us sometimes may feel discriminated, but then how would that make a person feel?
Hatred towards the person.
Yeah, so feel like, I don't want to be here, or, I don't like this. What else? Fear as well, isn't it? Like, you're sort of like, always sort of in that fight and flight mood, like what's going to happen to me, like, is somebody going to hurt me or something like that. So sort of, not having that feeling of empowerment, isn't it? Yeah, so those kind of feelings. And again, those are the breeding grounds for somebody to, be predisposed to start developing mental health problems. What about culture and expression of distress, the second one? So here I'm talking about, you've come in with a certain cultural background, and then how do you express, how does it manifest, the mental health symptoms, do you think? Is there any difference? Would there be any difference?
You might hold yourself back from telling anyone because you don't know how they will react.
That's it. So you're more scared about what reaction that would get, isn't it? So you'd probably not be talking about it. Yeah. Is there anything else you can think of? In fact, why I put this there is because, Shivani, were you going to say something?
Oh, no.
Yeah. No, why I put this there is because it has been researched to say that, how people express, communicate their distress is very much linked with culture, and not just culture, but also age and sex as well. So whether you're male or female, or where you are at, and as you mentioned earlier, Sifani, about how we're able to do that. So again, really interesting about how Asian cultures, they express their emotions and distress. So somatic symptoms, usually they present with somatic symptoms. The somatic symptoms meaning that bodily symptoms. So they'll probably present with like headache, I have good backache. But actually these might actually be signs of somebody struggling with mental health. Do you think, why do you think that is the case?
Because they might be suppressing their feelings for, I don't know, what length of period, and then that might obviously result to some physical stress, I suppose.
That certainly is a factor. But other thing is also, emotional distress are not encouraged to express, isn't it? Within Chinese culture, you are not encouraged to express the emotional distress. And it's much more acceptable when it's physical symptoms. Oh, it's a headache, then you go to a GP or a physician, and it's much more acceptable. And it's not attached with this idea of stigma in it as well. So that's definitely it. Whereas in Western culture, you're more open to talk about it, and people obviously feel much more comfortable talking about it, isn't it? And also, another thing is about, if you express these emotions, you might be perceived as somebody with, being weak, emotionally weak, and especially men are, faced with that, aren't they? So yeah, definitely that. And coming to more sort of like diagnosis stage, like when they come to sort of at the point of when they do have a sort of disorder, what are the challenges with culture and the diagnostic accuracy of that?
What Western cultures might describe as a mental illness, non-Western cultures might not, such as seeing visions.
That's it, yeah. Yeah, the sort of even hearing voice and connection with the God, and when they religiously practice that might actually be within their normal experience. Yeah, certainly, yeah.
I was going to say stigma as well. If the community, if you have a diagnosis, it kind of I guess with Asian culture, it will stick with you kind of your whole life. Like, and it's kind of talked about in a negative aspect within the community rather than it be like, oh, uskobayo, you should educate yourself on that. It's a common thing rather than uskobayo, this don't know, right? Like kind of like negative.
Definitely. And I think, and you're so right in saying that, because it's almost sort of like the economical and even the sort of the value of that person, and not just that person, but also the siblings in the house and the other people who are connected with that person gets affected.
The dynamic of the family becomes questioned because they've been.
And that's definitely the same. And I guess with the diagnosis part of discussion, the Western conceptualization, as you mentioned earlier about the construct and how it's for example, if you look at the international classification disorder, headaches and backaches may not be within the diagnostic criteria of maybe saying, this person is depressed, whereas Asians, they may not present with the typical signs of depression, signs and symptoms of depression. So it may not be very accurate. And it was so interesting. I was just looking through an article that says within Amish culture, flirting with a married lady and going off on holidays in off seasons and spending a lot of money on the telephone, and all these are actually within their normal behavior, whereas in Western culture it might be seen as somebody with a bipolar illness, like, oh my god, this is like out of ordinary. So again, really sort of where you come from and how it's conceptualized has a massive impact on it. And what about coping styles and seeking help? And I think that the stigma is definitely comes within that as well. And what are the things in terms of coping styles within the cultural sort of?
I think like Asian cultures bottle it up until it's like too much, whereas in Western cultures, because you're allowed to sort of express yourself, it's kind of like continuous. Like here at my workplace, having a therapist is so normal now. Like having almost everyone has a therapist at my workplace, right? Whereas like so they're encouraged to like release that the stress, whatever it is, like every week, every 2 weeks. Whereas in like somewhere in the East or in Africa, it might be like you just can't like deal with it internally, or you don't tell anyone until it's like the pressure's too much.
Definitely, I think I want that. And in fact, in that vein, people might actually not go to a psychiatrist. Oh my god! Like if you see a psychiatrist, like oh my, it's gone. And even psychiatrists, even us as professionals, we are stigmatized as well to some. Even here in Western country, like a lot of people do not want to see us. They would rather go and see the GP because it's headache, it's backache. Why would I see a psychiatrist? And also, sort of, they would rather use other methods like Chinese sort of, herbal treatment or religious prayer even. I have a lot of patients who are from Muslim background and they just hate the idea of medication. And in fact, in some ways, like, you do have to appreciate that it does have a lot of impact on them recovering as well. So it has to be very much incorporated into their recovery process because, if you say no, only medications, it's not going to work. And it does help. So I think that is quite important. And also because of that reason, people may not go to mental health professionals and, and not just that, because they may not be able to pay for it as well. So the economic barriers as well. Because, it's quite expensive to see a private psychiatrist or a private doctor, for example, So those kind of things. And what about the treatment and interventions issues? So once they've been diagnosed, they've got a mental health disorder, what sort of other things might be a challenge, when they do seek treatment? So if they go and seek someone for help, what sort of challenges there might be?
Consistency.
Consistency.
Yeah, so they might have external factors which comes into play. So they might not be able to make it a consistent routine.
Yeah, so sort of attending appointments. And the other commitments that might come into play. Yeah, definitely.
Kind of linking to that neglect, like they'll be like, or not, like they'll be like, oh, if someone's diagnosed with, like, say, more of a medical like diabetes or hypertension, you're going to take your medication religiously because you know the impact of neglecting that aspect of your health. Whereas amongst our community, we don't really understand the impact of neglecting our mental health, which is sometimes why it manifests more in a physical form rather than it manifesting at a stage where you can manage it more with, like, I guess, coping styles.
Definitely. And also, sadly, but it's true for mental health that, the journey when you do have mental disorder, it takes much longer than that. For example, if you have cough and cold, within a week you're, fit and you can go back to. Whereas with mental health, it does take time. It's the patience that you would require, really, and that definitely has an impact on, as you said. And other things also to do with, the shortage of ethnic minority health professions, especially around our, in a Western country like this. Like, there may not be, like, for example, you go and see someone, our parents may not be able to talk in English, and they not necessarily they won't be an interpreter. Although having said the NHS, they're really working hard to incorporate this, and if you ask for it, you do get it. But this has always been a challenge, though, despite that. So sometimes I end up becoming an interpreter for some of my own patients, which is not great, but it does help. And they feel straight away very much at ease when you can talk to them in your own language. So those kind of things, and because of all these things, people might actually prematurely drop out from their treatment, and that this even happens in our own country as well. So I think does this give you a bit an idea about culture and how it might impact on mental health? Yeah. Do we think is there anything else?
I'm just curious, if your clients or patients drop out of the treatment prematurely, what happens? Is that going to add more issues, illnesses
for the person?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, and I think NHS has now started to identify people who drop out. What is the reason behind them dropping out? And the culture has now become a massive sort of reason for that, and they have lots of projects going on at the moment to capture that data and be able to reach. So they have we have what we call as outreach services, like early intervention services and recovery services that actually go to people's houses so that they can engage them back in therapy again or back in treatment again. So a lot of work is going around that. And certainly if they disappear in that process, then the prognosis isn't great.
Do you have Nepalese patients?
Please do.
Do you have Nepalese patients?
Oh yes, I was just saying wasn't I sharing this earlier? First at work, and I actually have a Nepalese. This is a patient that happens to be mom of my friend from back home in Nepal when we did medicine together. So it was a very difficult scenario where I was trying to catch up with her, so we had to park that and then think about what do we do for a mom. So I do get not a lot, but
And is it related to problems that we just talked about?
Very much so.
Culture, families?
Very much so. And this actually turns out to be from a family where there is a medical doctor in the family, and still they waited until quite late, until she was very, very poorly, that they brought her to A&E. So you can imagine that.
Just on that, actually, when you realize it's also confidentiality. So in Nepal, it's not unheard of for a doctor to tell your family, even if you're gonna see a therapist privately. Doctor will just tell your mum because they know her or they know. Do you know what I mean?
That's it.
In
fact, a lot of people go to India for treatment because they don't want to see, and somehow it's a small, they just hear about it from other people, and they don't want that to happen. No, it is true, sadly. So we've talked about culture and its impact, and with that in mind, I just wanted to ask you guys on the worksheet, what are the challenges of being a bicultural individual? I'm sure there will be, and here I really want you guys to think about not just the disadvantages of being a bicultural, but also the advantages. What are the positives of being a bicultural? Take a few minutes to think about it, and maybe just what comes to your mind when that question pops in. Okay, so do you want to share what you think would be the challenges of being a bicultural?
Acceptance to society. So I guess when I'm in the UK, I'm not really considered fully British. But when I go home, I'm not fully considered Nepalese because I've lived here for so long.
Yes.
So it's that acceptance within a society and kind of feeling like a part, because as humans we want that social acceptance of being a part of a group.
Yeah.
But then you never really find that fully no matter where you go.
That's true. Definitely. That's
Feeling of like more belonging.
yeah. Okay. Definitely. Anybody else? What any positives on being a bicultural individual?
Adaptability.
Yeah.
If you can, so if you have a pretty good Nepali personality,
Yeah.
you're also able to come across quite British.
Yes, yes, it's
It means that anywhere you go in the world, you can sort of fit in.
yeah, definitely. And language is again another thing. So you're multilingual, in fact. We were talking about how we watch Bollywood movies and we can actually talk English. Yeah, so all those kind of things. No, I agree. So I guess there are certain guidance and rules how our parents bring us up, isn't it? Like, so we talk in a certain way, behave in a certain way, wear in a certain way. Or especially if I was definitely the victim of that. But at the same time, there is this, influenced by the culture of the host country. So, the peers that you have and, the mainstream education and media has a massive, massive role in that, like as you mentioned earlier, isn't it? So, definitely, so positives, I guess, as you said earlier about, it does evoke a feeling of pride and uniqueness. So you're unique, like how you can just adapt with anywhere anywhere you go in the world. But at the same time, again, as you mentioned earlier about identity confusion and value clashes, and I think again that can actually also be a sort of reason for somebody to become mentally unstable at points, especially if they're being ostracized for certain things that you find difficult to adapt to. So yeah, definitely.
Sorry, I have a question on that. So I just had a question. What kind of mental health illness would be linked to this? So is there a correlation, like, having this bicultural identity, is that going to make you like have, maybe feel anxious or depressed? Like it could be different things, right, depending on the individual. But
Again, you're right. So it could be depending on the individual, but there is a very specific disorder within the International Classification of Disorder, ICD-11, actually, the version 11. It has something called adjustment disorders, and that adjustment could be fitting into that. So that could be one reason. It's not just, or it could be like losing someone. So adjusting into a new situation or what life throws you. So there is actually a quite sort of disorder for somebody that can develop mental health problems. Yeah. What does this picture make you feel? Nepal, of course. What does it evoke in you? What sort of
National pride.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. What else?
Cultural heritage.
Yes, definitely.
Home.
Oh yeah. I miss it already again. I want to go there. No, certainly this evokes, like, for me, it evokes a feeling of warmth, of sense of belonging to something, and it also evokes some sad feelings of not going home and not seeing Dharara, for example. It's sort of like, it just takes me back to my childhood as well. So definitely this really gives me all these sort of feelings, which of course I can relate to all of you here. Yeah, so sense of belonging, really, isn't it? So we really need to talk about this because this is again a very important part of mental health. What are we doing to develop this sense of belonging here in the UK, or in the Western or in the foreign land? Nepali society and universities, I'm sure there are Nepalese within the university. How many of you are working closely with them? Yeah, quite closely, of course, yeah. So I was just going to, you raised hand, the question was going to be directed towards you, Pawanji. Like, as Merging NepSocs, so what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to create?
I think it is a social mobility through sense of belonging, using that sense of belonging as a networking platform where we can kind of help Nepalese community move up the social ladder.
Definitely.
So it comes from a reflection that our parents are in like proletariat working class phase, and it's a movement towards bourgeoisie, which is like a white collar professionals. That kind of transition is how we define social mobility, and to change that comes sense of belonging.
Exactly. So that is the core feeling
Yes.
that we're trying to develop here. What other things are we doing? Ethnic community groups? obviously my husband's been sort of running this Pasapucha for how many donkey years? I keep asking, when I was like just came into this country, I was like, why are you doing this? Like you're not at home literally, you're just doing a lot of things. Like why do you think you're doing this? But now it kind of makes sense, like, this is really for us to be able to have that platform to contribute and not just, get something out of it. So yes, Pasapucha. And what about professional academic groups? So, like being a doctor myself, like I'm always seeking out for like place where I can maybe contribute, go and maybe speak to people who of the same profession. Even like we have Nepalese Doctor Association, Nepalese Nurses Association, who are actively not just working here, but trying to find ways to help back home in Nepal. Again, this is to do with, developing that sense of belonging and also, continued political affiliation. So there are quite a lot of organizations that are maybe not influencing the policy making within the Nepalese government, but they're doing a lot of they're practicing their political philosophy within the Western, within the foreign land. So this again is a way of doing developing the sense of belonging. What would you ask or how would you introduce a country to a non-Nepali friend?
Mount Everest, that's the first thing. Mount Everest.
Start off from there.
Start from there and then work your way.
What's it?
Food?
Oh yes, that's part of
like...
I was when I was thinking about those are the main things that came to my mind as well. What else would you say to your Nepali friend? We have Visit Nepal going on at the moment. So what other things?
Don't visit Nepal at the moment. Anyway.
Yeah, of course, put
that,
Gurkhas, and we're going to say something.
No.
Yeah, so costumes. My son hates wearing dowry surwal, but I'm like, you have to. This is sense of belonging. Although he doesn't know what that means, but hopefully when he grows up, even looking at his picture, you were 6 and you're wearing dowry surwal, so you better wear it now. Yeah. So and then charity for Nepal. How many of you people have supported or raised money or things like that for Nepal? I'm sure you all of us have done, isn't it? But why are we not? Maybe we are also, doing charity work for other things as well. But we tend to be more inclined to, supporting Nepal. Why do you think that is? Why do we do that? It's home, isn't it? We want to contribute. We don't know where, how that money is gonna do what it's gonna do. But at the same time, you just want to get that feeling of doing something. Like earthquake, we raised Pasapucha raised about £40,000 and quite a lot of money. And then we were able to build like school in Nepal and a few other things that was really, again, very nice things that we managed to do. So I remember this for other political causes. I remember sitting outside with banners outside Qatar embassy some years ago, protesting for Nepalese worker back in Qatar where they were not being treated well, when they were building this stadium. And I suppose, it was just this one feeling of wanting to do something really, and supporting your fellow brothers and sisters really back there. And again, other protests as well in Diyarbakir before the earthquake, or after the earthquake. And then this is our parents' favorite one, isn't it? My son, again, my daughter is fine, but my son hates to wear that tika, like he doesn't like that thing in his forehead. But again, our parents want you to celebrate all this. And I remember you and your team came for Dasai Bhaili, and it was amazing, How did that make you feel?
Well, I look forward to that every year.
Yeah.
It's like, Bhaili is like the favorite part of me. Of the MERGING NepSocs together. So I love that.
You love, but then what does it make you feel? How does it make you feel?
Well, closer to home.
Yeah.
Because it's Tihar and you remember the things I used to do back in Nepal when you were a kid, and then you get to do that here. So it reminds you of that time, right?
Exactly.
So if you feel closer to being Nepalese.
So we're all doing various things, isn't it? To really get that feeling of sense of belonging. And I suppose we're talking about this today because this is also again recognized that sense of belonging brings stability to mental health. It does, one way or the other. Yeah.
Sorry, it's just not to answer now, but it would be interesting to hear from people. When we said, what does that picture make you feel? But what does that picture also maybe not make you feel? Does it not make you feel like you belong? The opposite of feeling proud or feeling like home, because that really depends on where you've grown up, right? So and whether you lived in Nepal or you didn't, how often you went there, do you have family there? Because I think for me, for example, when I was younger, that didn't feel like home, but now it does. That's because I've gone there so often. And I've got family there that it does actually feel like home now. So it's interesting to look at that journey as you grow up
definitely.
as well.
And also,
so something to
definitely. And some of this, is there anything that obviously Sivan has definitely brought this point up? Quite an interesting one.
I think what Vishnu was saying about playing Divsi Bhailo, because I think for certain individuals, it probably is this room as well. I think we experienced a lot of what is being mentioned here in army camps somewhere in the UK. So it's like our identity of like this version of being Nepali that we created happened right from some little town in the UK or etc. And then when we go to Nepal, then we match the previous slide that you talked about, whether that's trying to fit in.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show how varied everyone's experiences are, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
I think the sense of belonging, it can be flipped to a positive side as well. Because let's say if you're facing quite a stressful Western life, and work life and everything, you could sort of escape from there and then go back home and sort of roam into the Eastern way of life. Like, and it can make you fresh when you come back to the Western world.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I think it makes me question if we're like all seeking a sense of belonging, because we're the first generation of like migrating families, because I feel like we're trying to build that foundation now, but it definitely triggers me if like the next generation will be like that bothered, because
will they be that bothered?
Yeah, because they'll be more inclined to assimilate more.
But I guess that's where our role comes in, as what do they see us doing, and I suppose they learn a lot from you because your education starts from home first, isn't it? So and they do get influenced by that. Anyway, so it's sort of like carrying on doing what we think is right for us. Brilliant. So I'm just trying to catch my train of thought. So yeah, definitely. So I suppose this is quite an important aspect, and we've talked about this in more detail. Now we've talked about culture and sense of belonging also. Now just moving more towards the science, a little bit of a dry sort of thing, but let's keep this interactive as well. And you guys have been excellent. I'm so pleased that over to your talking. I want more of you talking, please. So. Culture is a big aspect, but what are the other things that we need to think about when we're talking about risk for mental illness? I mean, there is this biopsychosocial model, which is a recognized model, whereby it looks more holistically, recognizing each individual by their thoughts. They've been unique, that they're all unique and they have their own thoughts, own feelings, and history. So here you're looking at 3 models, so biological, psychological, social. What do you guys think about what could be the biological reasons for somebody to be at risk of developing mental illness?
Genes.
Genes? Yeah.
So if someone in the family or they have a history of mental health issues, it can predispose them.
Definitely. Yeah. Chronic physical health. Certainly. Yeah. And here we're talking about things
like living with, I guess, this is quite extreme, but like if you have amputation, acceptance of like your amputated limb and then like living with that, or even just just being diagnosed with, I don't know, like an autoimmune condition and then having to accept that and live with that as well.
And especially if something childhood illnesses when you actually, you don't even know what's going on.
What you eat as well apparently has an effect on like your gut bacteria. I've read it.
Yes, this is again a massive research into that.
Yeah. So apparently even what you eat can affect how you're thinking, how you're feeling.
Yeah, definitely. So here we are getting here is modified and non-modified factors that feeds into biological, isn't it? As you mentioned earlier about non-modified genes, you can't do much about it. You're born with it. Whereas the diet, the lifestyle, the medication, and your stress response and all sorts come into play. What about psychological?
I've come from a medical background, so I feel kind of like coping mechanisms and how you handle and deal with situations that really affects how you mental health.
Definitely. So your response to stress and definitely human factors. Anything else? What could be psychological factors? Yeah, okay. So
How you look at it as well. So like, some people can look at a stressful thing as like, oh, it's the end of the world. Other people can look at it as like it's a challenge for me to like. I think it's how you look at things also. Like depends on how you interpret it.
And that's called health behavior. And again, it's a recognized way of sort of interpreting, your sort of whatever you're thrown at in terms of illness. So some people might just stay home, like I'm with a cough and cold, like I can't do this, I can't go to work. But other people might just manage to, just cruise through the day, no issues. So yeah, definitely those. And your self-esteem, your sort of the temperament you're born with, your coping skills, your social skills. Some people might not want to talk about certain things, your attitudes, even your emotional intelligence and things like that play a part in psychological factors. What about social environment? We talked about culture quite a lot, but what are the other social and environmental factors that could be risks? So obviously the environment, we think about social environment would be a thing.
Maybe the issues that we're seeing around you affects you about what you want to do in future. Like for instance, I think I'm such a feminist now because I saw like how my mom struggled like to get educated, just the way like she didn't have any like job to like make money in Nepal.
Yeah, so economical factors, It almost shapes you, isn't it, the person you become,
Expectations, like I said earlier, so maybe your family have a bubble where they see you pursuing a certain career. Like it's their choice and not yours.
Exactly.
Whereas it should be the other way around. And then a bit later in life, maybe marriage, when it comes to marriage.
Yes.
So whether love marriage or arranged marriage, they might have that.
And actually that's quite an interesting one because I've got a little slide that will share that. And actually, it might be being single and actually not being single is also, and being in a relationship actually can be quite stressful than being single. So, definitely those kind of things, And in school for, children, I thought I saw a raise of hand, and family circumstances, as you mentioned earlier, so those, all of that. So they usually come in this domain. It's on your worksheets as well to think about what is unique for you. What do you think you are most vulnerable to, and what has your life experiences been, and stressors in your life and events, somebody you may have lost, or somebody, you felt under threat by certain things, or chronic illnesses you may have experienced. What is unique for you in regards to these things putting you so be predisposing you to mental health. So recognizing those are quite important. Like, giving those worksheets, you can work it at home, you don't have to do it now, but think about those and what you can do to make it better. So again, as you mentioned earlier about, children with sort of type 1 diabetes, for example, like they need insulin right from when they're 5, 6, and then they have to live with it all their life. How is that going to impact their mental health? People who've loved someone they've lost, and how is that going to impact them throughout their life? How it shapes them as they grow. So those kind of things. So if we move on. So just going into a little bit of basics of medical sort of background to the brain and what happens in the brain with and mental illness. So here we're talking about, obviously brain is a very important part of our body, and it's usually obviously 2% of our body weight, but obviously it has a huge function, and lots and lots of 86 billion nerves and nerve cells and fibers within that, and how they communicate is through neurotransmitters. Now, why I brought this here today is to really give you an idea what actually happens in mental disorders. So here we're mainly focusing on 3 neurotransmitters, the noradrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin. And just to show you that it's not just how we feel and how we're thinking, it's also to do with the chemicals that's running in your brain and how that's going to impact those things. Because these neurotransmitters are directly linked with the thoughts processes, the feelings, and how you respond to external stimuli. And for example, in depression, you would be seeing less of serotonin and noradrenaline in your brain. So what we're trying to achieve with antidepressants is that we're bringing those level up. And I guess when somebody is psychotic or they're hearing voices or hallucinating, the level of dopamine in their brain is like sky high. And what we're trying to do with antipsychotics is try to dampen them down. So that's where the role of psychiatrists come in, and this is what I do day in and day out, recognizing what disorder it is and how we treat them with the right medication. So I don't want to be going into a lot of details into it unless you have any questions on this? Because this is just to give an idea about the chemical changes in the brain.
What do you think is because there's like a stigma attached to antidepressants, right? Like, oh, they're not effective. You have to be on them for life. Like when you come off of it, it's very like you kind of makes you go back in. So what's your view on like antidepressants?
Yeah. So again, with antidepressant, as I said earlier about how mental disorder itself is, that it is not like a cough and cold. So it does, sadly, that's how it works out, that it does take a bit longer for any person. And it also depends on the individual, how they respond to a medication. So all the medication, psychotropic medication that we use, do not work straight away unless the sedating medication that obviously makes them feel, they put them to sleep and things like that. But especially antidepressants take 6 to 8 weeks to start working to its fullest. So those chemicals needs a bit of time to be properly and cleanly, homogeneously distributed in the body, and they start having the effect. So yeah, it can be a very frustrating journey, but what really helps is that if the patients and the relatives are given psychoeducation about that and they're informed about it, then they're much more comfortable taking it. But yeah, and I agree that some people might not have that patience. So how would you recognize signs and symptoms of mental illness? And this is something I suppose all of us may have some ways of recognizing it. But let's think about 4 main domains within that. What sort of behavioral signs we'll be looking at when we're trying to recognize not just yourself, but also people around you, family or friends, or even people at workplace. How would you recognize, and what sort of signs would you be looking at behavioral-wise? What sort of things you would see? I think maybe it's mental illness.
I was going to say like withdrawal from situations, but then you could also do the contrary, because I know some people overcompensate.
Yeah.
So during a time that they should be sad, they should be like taking care of themselves, they're putting themselves out there too much and doing a bit too much, and you're like, you should take this time to so
definitely. So it's sort of like extreme behaviors, isn't it?
Maybe like forgetfulness for cognitive?
Yeah, cognitive, definitely, yeah. So that would be and in fact you can start thinking about all these 4 domains at the same time. So what some physical signs you can looking at, emotional signs.
Physical, they're always tired, or they're tired.
Yeah, even if they've slept through the night, they still wake up feeling quite lethargic. Yeah.
With emotional, crying.
Yeah,
If
so
you're crying.
more. Yeah, like if you see
Crying,
watch a
crying.
movie and
Actually, no. I'm actually being serious. Like, it's good to cry, because sometimes if you have anxiety or you're stressed out and you have a lot of pent up emotions, you end up crying in situations where you shouldn't be crying, and that's because actually there's something else that's meant to come out.
So definitely finding out that it comes out. Yeah, and then you watch a movie and you just become emotional, whereas you weren't like that before. So all these things. Yeah, so certainly, there are. I think there are a few on your worksheets, and for you to even think about and put it there. And in fact, if I look at those, I fit into all those boxes at a certain point of the day, or like that. But then what? So does that make me mentally ill? So am I mentally ill for having these symptoms?
See, when it becomes a habit, without you think, like when it becomes a habit, then I think you should see someone.
Habit, as in, so it's happening more and more
over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And you can't do your day-to-day functions. So maybe you don't wake up to go to work or don't go to school, don't go to something like that.
So it starts affecting your life negatively, definitely. So you're looking at these sort of the key change in behavior, which is sort of uncharacteristic for you. So it's out of character. This is not what you were like, let's say 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. This was not what it wasn't me. For some people, waking up at 11 or 12 is fine, like it's normal, but then for some people it might be completely out of ordinary. Yeah, so we're looking at, so with that in mind, I want to talk about depression. How many of us here have been depressed or seen anybody in the family who's been depressed? I mean, again, this might be a question, very difficult to answer, but I suppose this is sort of like really recognizing and understanding what depression is, because we use this term very loosely, don't we? We say, oh, I feel so depressed, oh, I feel so anxious, but does that really mean you're depressed? We keep saying that. That's big. The news, news on coronavirus is making me depressed. But do you suffer from depression? That's tremendous. Yeah, so it's hard to say that, isn't it? But when we're talking about depression is actually a mental disorder. It's not just saying loose damp and feeling low or sad. We're looking at 3 typical symptoms within that, which is on the top, so feeling low, losing interest, or which we call as anhedonia. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard that before. And then increased fatiguability. So these 3 are the main core features, but there are other symptoms within that, which is listed here. But I suppose how we, as psychiatrists, diagnose depression is by categorizing them around symptom cluster. So, and that is on the sort of lines of severity of symptoms profile. So, for example, with mild, you may see just 2 of the typical, and then 2 of the other symptoms. But why is that important is that if it's a mild depression, you don't treat depression with antidepressant. So you don't start prescribing people with, just having 2 of those and 2 of those. Whereas if they're moderately or severely depressed, then yes, antidepressant plays a part. Okay? But what we are really trying to look here is, and when we're trying to diagnose someone, is to say, as you said earlier about, present most days and every day in your life, and been there for more than 2 weeks. In fact, 2 weeks will be the cutoff for depression. And then causing significant impact, like you said, about functioning, you're not able to do things that you were usually able to do. And I was thinking about this in the way that, you go to a cinema, you're feeling like, really upset, you go to cinema, when you're able to follow the plot, you know what's going on, you're able to even enjoy it, and you come back feeling fine. So obviously you're not depressed because, there is lack of response, so there is lack of response changes when you're depressed. So even if the things that you were doing before, you stopped having any interest in those activities. And that's when we can say that somebody is depressed. And very similar lines on anxiety as well. So has anybody here felt anxious anytime in their life?
Yes.
Yeah. We were talking about
stress and anxiety can go hand in hand.
Definitely. I was certainly anxious, I was about to miss a roundabout this morning when I was trying to, this afternoon when I was trying to get here. But then does that make me somebody who has an anxiety disorder? No. But I guess if it was a disorder, I wouldn't be standing here and talking to you guys here. So so again, here we're looking at symptom clusters as well. So we're looking at psychological arousal and physical arousal symptoms. And there are various types of anxiety disorders. We won't be talking into that a lot today, but really to understand that with anxiety comes not just the psychological, so you're sort of fearful about what's going to happen, things going wrong, you're worrying about everything, but it's also the physical symptoms. And as psychiatrists, this is the first thing we ask somebody when they say they feel anxious. Like, so what are the physical, what do you experience? Because some people might have racing heart, and other people may not have the same physical symptoms. They might have completely different symptom profile. They might just have headaches, like we said earlier, or they might just have fast breathing, or not being able to settle and feeling restless all the time. So it varies. But again, within that, we're looking at the severity of it. So how severe it is and how it's impairing in their day-to-day functioning. So really, we've almost come to the end of our first part, but here I guess it's for us to really think about, the things that we talked about earlier. How are you guys feeling right now, by the way? Are you feeling all right? I'm not made you depressed or anxious. Yeah. So I think we've come to almost the end of this part, and we've covered the mental health and illness, and obviously the Nepalese diaspora we talked about, science behind it, and dependent anxiety. But is there anything that sort of things that you felt you may have missed or you wanted to ask?
I have a question. Based on antidepressants, so do the patients have the choice to go on antidepressant, or is it just prescribed by the doctor and they're the ones who have to stay on it?
I think this is again collaborative working with patients, and you can't enforce any treatment on anyone. Mm-hmm. And even antihypertensive, you can't say you have to take it. It's about the person having the capacity to make that decision and say that this is right for me. But as professionals, it's giving them information and giving them informed choice for them to help make decision that this is what I think you need. But of course, we would have to give a sort of information in terms of the right information to say that we feel that this is what you need. Mm-hmm. But it's obviously up to the patients whether.
Because from my understanding, I have a negative light of antidepressant. Maybe it's the media that's portraying it as such. But
my friend, he was on like antidepressant, but it only made it worse for him. So when he got out of it, that's when it actually started getting better. So like, I don't know how.
No, and antidepressants, all psychotropic medication come with side effects, and that's again the darker side of psychotropic medication. But before it starts getting better, it does get worse with antidepressant and any medication. Because obviously the way the mental illness is that the symptoms don't suddenly disappear, and what has been evidence-based, and again more and more research is saying that just antidepressant is not going to make a person feel better quicker, but if it's in line with psychological therapy together in combination, then it's more likely to work and be effective for that person. So yeah, I mean I think it should be both together rather than one. Yeah.
I just had a question on anxiety on the previous slide. So maybe this is something I read online. So with anxiety as well, would you say that it's actually your internal thoughts that kind of take over your mind? So whether it's true or untrue, it kind of then manifests into loss of appetite or like lack of sleep, So like for example, I know there's some, I'm using the app Calm, it has like different mindfulness things, and it kind of says you need to not run away from your thoughts, but kind of ride the wave. And let that process, because the more you run away from it, the more it will just be worse. So you just have to cope with it and just,
So one of the diagnostic feature of anxiety, so which I haven't put it here, is also avoidance behavior. So this is like innate to us as human, that you would see a lion and you would either freeze or you would run away, right? So it's the same with anxiety. You're in a situation that you're on threat. You think you're under threat. It may not be a visible threat, but you know that it's something. And this is also to do with PTSD, when people remember their trauma, and the trauma is not happening in front of them, but just even think about it, just seeing a flash of it on a TV or something, and that brings up these emotions. And what people tend to do is obviously hide away from it. And avoidance behavior is a part of anxiety disorder. And what therapy does is they tend to retrain the brain to say that yes, you're trying to avoid. We know that, but it's not going to help you. So so gently. I mean, I think it's sometimes hard to do it on your own. So that's when you need professional help, don't you? So so facing your fear would be the way forward with overcoming anxiety disorder. I guess it's the same with lots of other things as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Any more questions before we take a short break? Yeah? Brilliant. So we'll have about 10-15 minutes break and we'll gather again.